Hello, guys. Here I am again to continue the reading. This is day 2 of the reading of my first novel called 2 that is currently for sale at Amazon.com. If you want to find me on Amazon.com, just type in my name at the search bar, Carla Natali. That's how it's spelled. And you find my first novel for sale. So here we are. It's day 2. Let's go for it. The walls were covered with white and blue wallpaper that reproduced the sky on a summer's day. Light white drapes framed the window with bars on the outside, from which you could see a green backyard. There was a crib and a bed, each occupying one side of the large bedroom. Catherine walked toward the crib. As she got closer, she saw a baby, who she guessed was under 1 year old, lying in a big pool of blood. His throat slashed, and a cross symbol carved right into the middle of his forehead. That one symbol, cross, linked these killings to the previous one, the one that had happened exactly 1 month before, on the 18th of April of 2012. The contrast of the red spatters against the crispy white crib gave the scenario an even more brutal aspect. As she walked to the other side of the room, she tripped over a music box that started playing a lullaby. Lying in a small bed was another boy, who she figured was about 5 years old, still holding a teddy bear soaked in red. His throat also slit, and the same cross engraved on his forehead. The bed was almost as high as the top bed of a bunk bed. At the end of it was a little ladder, and right next to the pillow was a wooden slider that led straight to the floor. The boy's hand was hanging from it, making a bright crimson stream run down and drip slowly from its edge into a growing puddle, which stained the polished wooden floor, probably ruining it forever. The musical background provided by the box was like heat melting the ice of her frozen emotions. In order to ignore the raging water beneath the calm, solid surface, she was trying to keep her mind focused on frivolous things, like how much fun it would have been to have a bed like that when she was a kid. Will somebody please shut this thing up? I'm trying to focus here. Her voice was rough, but not loud. She was rarely loud. Robert responded immediately, jumping at the box and shutting its lid. Everything pointed to the fact that these kids had also been killed in their sleep, which was in a way a relief to her. The other case was pretty similar, but it had happened to a victim from a much different social class. The mother has been the main suspect, since scars and bruises caused prior to the murder was revealed by the boy's autopsy to be clear evidence of abuse. The victim was a 6-year-old boy who lived alone with his mother after the father had left 2 years before. As far as they knew, maintained no contact with the family. She finished examining the scene and went so quickly that Robert almost had to chase her down the hallway. What? Where are you going? I'm done here. Gotta go back to the office and think. Let it settle a bit. Let my mind work its way through what it's seen. Care to share something with me? I have nothing to share, Robert. Not at this moment. I will do when I do. You will know when I do. Will I really? He asked, raising one of his eyebrows in suspicion, which was flavored with a pinch of resentment. She didn't answer, just turned around and climbed down the stairs, completely forgetting to ask her partner if he needed a lift back downtown. On her way to the car, she bumped into Hawk, a strong and tall guy, and almost fell back. He held her by her arm, helping her regain balance. Don't you go falling on me, detective, he said, his words drenched in malice. She didn't care to respond, simply squinted at him with disgust. So what's this? So is that the same murderer from the projects? He continued, ignoring her look. Stop sniffing around, Hawk. When the time is right, we'll call a press conference. So that means I'm right. Will it be yours? What will be mine? The case. Will you turn it into another Rangini letter towards stardom? I could help, you know. How can you be so cold? I'm stepping out of one of the most shocking crime scenes I've ever been in, and you're asking me about stardom? What the fuck is wrong with you? She said, pushing him away from her door and entering the car. On the way back to the station, she felt completely astonished, torn between excitement at being right once again and disgust for finding herself facing such a vicious murderer. If there was one time she didn't want to be right, this would be it. Yet the case of child abuse that ended tragically, according to the chief, had turned out to be serial killing after all, just as she predicted. So far, it was obviously not assigned to her, once Logan was there with his partner, investigating the crime scene just as she was. And although her guts were clearly telling her to step aside as something didn't feel right, she chose to listen to her head instead, which kept screaming that this was the case she had been waiting for all her life. She was going to talk to the chief as soon as possible and claim it, highlighting the fact that she was the only one who suspected it was a serial killing from the beginning, even though she had never been to the first crime scene. She wanted to go as soon as she heard about the cross carved into the boys' foreheads. Tobias, the chief, talked her out of it, saying that the media might jump to conclusions if she was spotted there. I don't think this case is for you, Kathy. Leave it alone. It's probably about a child abuse gone way too wrong. Leave it to the homicides. Well, you sent Logan. I did, but he was only the protocol. If you step in, the media won't leave us alone. It's a boy from the projects. A lot of bad stuff happens around that area. Of course, it's tragic, but it's probably an isolated event. The boy's mother is already being considered the main suspect. They're bringing her in. Leave it as it is. Let's not make a circus out of this one, okay? Catherine understood the loud and clear message. Although she respected and admired he's a boy from the project's words sickened her a bit. Poor kids died every day, victims of street gangs, addiction, or abusive parents, and no one really cared, because that what life was like for the less privileged ones. Tough luck. Only the strong ones would survive, and there was no one to protect them, no one to save them from their fate. As sad as it sounded, she knew for herself that it was true. Things were still very raw. The only link between the killings was the cross carved into the kid's skin. So far, it didn't look very promising. What did they miss at the first crime scene? What did the victims have in common? Why children? Why their throats slit? Why there was a sign of a cross carved with a knife into their foreheads? A million questions rushed through her brain as she tried to recreate the crime scene in her head. Look for something that could tie the two cases together, other than the obvious bloody sign. She knew that if she wanted to stand out, she would have to see what no one else did. Hi, sorry, I went to pick up a timer so we don't lose track of time. I don't want to bore you guys. Okay, so let's go. Logan and Derek were also serial killer investigators, but she was the most famous one. It was her picture that was always published in the newspaper, partly because she had solved some very complicated cases But her pretty face obviously had a lot to do with that, too. The public couldn't get enough of her. A tall, beautiful woman who was also intelligent and bold enough to hunt down the most brutal killers and send them to jail was admirable. There was no way this could go wrong. It was almost too good to be true. Of course, the fact that she would jump at what she considered to be the best cases before anyone else got a chance, or the fact that she was no team player, was making it harder and harder for her to find partners. She was becoming a little overlooked, but at the end of the day, what really mattered was that she got the job done. At least, that was what mattered to the chief and the media after all. She decided to pay the place a visit now. She promised herself to make it worth it. She was walking on thin ice, going alone to the crime scene, something the chief had specifically told her not to do. But Logan and Derek had been to both scenes, so wasn't it only fair that she did the same? She wasn't about to put herself in a disadvantaged position if she could help it, and she could, even if she had to put up with Robert's disgust about his not being invited to come along. Her plan still looked pretty good. After quite a long drive, she got to the opposite side of town, the less privileged side. A battered, brownish building popped up in the horizon, and then she saw a bunch of poorly dressed kids playing baseball, using a roll of socks as a ball and some wooden sticks for bats. Catherine thought they looked just like her brothers. She climbed the stairs to the Sanchez floor. There was no elevator. She followed a dark, narrow hallway that smelled of urine. Less than welcome childhood memories flashed up once again. There she was, at number 302. She ripped the black and yellow police tape that sealed up the apartment door as she entered. Her nostrils were drenched with the sickening odors of mold and blood. Yes, death has its own peculiar aroma, which she had become very familiar to. She stood still for a few moments at the doorstep, so that her eyes could get used to the semi-darkness of the place. In spite of there being a bright day outside, the apartment was shrouded with shadows. The lights seeped in through a small solitary window, which faced a large wall belonging to a building under construction no more than 20 feet away. The air had given up on trying to get in, leaving the room to its stale share of old breath. She observed the room for a moment. It was small, but since the only piece of furniture in it was an old rotten chair in front of a TV set, it wasn't crowded enough to evoke claustrophobia. She looked for the switch, but it didn't work. She reached for the tiny but powerful flashlight she always carried around with her in her pocket and started investigating. The first things she looked for were pictures. They always had been her favorite clothes for pictures, for in pictures you could see people's eyes, and they rarely lied. The place looked like a discarded scary movie backdrop. It was sad to think that someone would have lived there, especially a child. As she looked around the room once again, she thought she caught a glimpse out of the corner of her eye of a silhouette in the construction right in front of the window. She then quickly turned her attention to it. However, it turned out to be no more than a pile of bricks. My mind must be playing tricks on me. No wonder this place is really creepy, she thought as she realized there was no one there. She spotted what seemed to be a pile of dirty rags in the corner of the room. As she got closer, it turned out to be an old mattress covered with dry, dark, clotted blood. The gore was also spattered on the walls, forming a pattern that could easily be mistaken for one of those modern abstract paintings. She now remembered seeing those images in pictures, but they certainly looked completely different in reality, ready to be touched and smelled. Catherine kneeled down to examine the kid's bed, and when she touched it, she heard a loud squeak in it as a rat ran between her legs, making her fall flat on her bottom. Annoyed at her own vulnerability, she cursed the rodent. She went to the bedroom, where the sum of the furniture was a no bed and a closet with its doors partially open. She opened them completely and saw a shoebox with some pictures sitting on the top shelf. As she pulled the box, a bottle of liquor came rolling down and almost hit her on the head. I gotta leave this dump soon, or I'll be the next to die. There were some old and some new pictures. Some old and some new pictures. In the old ones, a kid who she recognized as the victim was smiling most of the time. A man appeared in a great deal of them. But the new ones had a different tone. The boy was alone, dressed in church clothes, hair come back with gel, and showing an empty look on his face. The mother wasn't in any of these pictures, but for some reason she wouldn't admit, not even to herself, that she had trouble. But for some reason she wouldn't admit, not even to herself, she had no trouble picturing her face, even though they never met. Way to go, Detective Logan. Is that how you plan to get this case, leaving a box full of photographs behind? Have you even looked at these? She dragged her mind back to the apartment. They simply had to find this monster before he or she would get a chance to strike again, and she knew they would. So in her opinion, the best shot was with her conducting the investigations. Where would the father of those children be? Maybe he could answer some of the questions that popped into her head. In both cases, the father were in the family pictures, but no longer lived with the family. Catherine was lost in her thoughts when her phone rang. "Where are you?" she heard Robert's impatient voice ask. "Hey, Rob, it's becoming a habit, huh? I'm back at the Sanchez apartment looking for some answers, something other than the obvious to link these two cases." "What? Alone?" "Yes, sorry." She knew what was coming when she first decided to go alone instead of inviting her partner to come along. But it didn't bother her to the point of calling him on the phone. "So maybe you're looking in the wrong place. The report on the Hopkins just came in, and Logan and Derek are all over it." "What does it say?" she asked, barely being able to contain the expectation in her voice. "Did you hear what I just said?" "I only took a quick peek. The guys have it now. If you don't come here right now, I don't think you should bother coming at all, 'cause they're probably holding on to this one." He figured scaring her a little would be a fair way to punish her for her lack of team spirit. "I'll be there in 40 minutes. Don't worry, though. I'm calling the chief right away." That kind of behavior made him wonder whether she would ever think of him as a partner, or whether she would just keep treating him as a guy chosen to be a partner by the chief for bureaucratic reasons. She shoved the pictures into her bag, called the chief, and left at once. As she went through the station door, she saw Robert coming at her, holding a brown envelope. "You got it once again, Ice Queen. Let's see what you make of it." She grabbed the envelope with a smile on her face, where one could only clearly read, "I told you so," walked by a very displeased Logan, and went to her office alone, closing the door behind her. She laid the envelope on top of her desk and stared at it for a while. She was feeling a little awkward, lightheaded, anxious. This weird tiredness was consuming her. She couldn't decide whether or not she wanted to see what was inside that envelope. She shook her head energetically, as if trying to snap out of the situation. People could call her many things, but emotional certainly wasn't one of them. She was always very rational and controlled. She was aware of her advantage of being a pretty woman, and she would use it deliberately to get cases if she had to, though this time it was strictly a matter of competence. She also stood up to the responsibility of doing a good job. Being perfectly honest, she actually felt the need to take it a step further and do an outstanding job, so that she could rise above the fire line that those hurt egos that she trampled on her way up, that she had trampled on her way up. She took a deep breath once again, trying to control her inner turmoil. All those emotions, fear and anxiousness running wild, not like her at all. This case was obviously getting under her skin. She wondered where the hell was Catherine Thornton's mask, that of the code investigator. That mask had earned her present position, and which she could not afford to lose now. This case obviously got the media's eye, and she knew how quickly they could build you up or completely destroy you. She had to solve it, and in time too. She couldn't afford to let her past ruin her future, in spite of how hard her memories were trying to force their way into her head. She had to keep them locked in the dark room where they belonged. However, their pounding at their mind's door was too distracting for her to keep focused. For the first time, she wasn't being able to use her technique of seeing through the killer's eyes, for example. For some unknown reason, she wasn't being able to think like the murderer, to get into his mind, to see his motives, and that was making her uncomfortable. She believed that even madness had its logic. Some may not agree to that logic, but there was an explanation that made sense. Well, kind of. There was always a certain mechanism attached to the serial killings. So once she figured that out, once she got inside the killer and understood his soul, she could be able to predict his or her next move and catch him or her. This technique will probably sound bizarre and not accurate to another investigator's ear, so she never shared it with anyone, and not being able to share was one of the reasons she was such a loner. And that was something she had learned to do from an early age. For her, entering a sick mind was merely a matter of practicing, obviously, after having spent her childhood under the care of a sociopath, from whom she learned how twisted minds work. She meant to do it more often, to close her eyes and enter the killer's head, but every time she felt her journey inside the murderer was beginning, she would open her eyes abruptly, like a child fighting sleep. At last, she opened the envelope. The report confirmed that both children had been killed in their sleep, just like Thomas Sanchez before them. She continued reading, going over technical data, passing through angles and possible types of weapons used. Old bone fractures and bruises prior to Abbott were also shown. She trembled. Robert was right. I was looking in the wrong place. There's our not so explicit link. The bittersweet mix of emotions overwhelmed her. She felt excited and relieved for finally having tools to draw the victim's profile with. Indeed, it was too soon to draw on the assassins. She was utterly filled with rage and sadness. She couldn't help feeling deep sympathy for those abused children. What type of psychopath would have a kick out of slaughtering abused kids? Oh my God, how much suffering is enough? She checked her watch. It was almost 5:30 p.m., and she hadn't even had lunch. She was beginning to feel lightheaded. She blamed it on her low blood sugar level instead of her unexpected rush of emotions. That's it for today. I'd better have something to eat before I pass out, she told herself as she organized the reports back into the files and locked them up in their desk drawer. She didn't want anyone messing with them. As she was leaving her office, she bumped into Robert. So, he asked, barely able to hide his frustration for not having been invited for a brainstorm. That was definitely how he pictured partnership. Hey, Robert, look, I'm hungry and tired. Could we discuss this tomorrow? Sure, it was a long day. Do you want me to take you somewhere to eat? I know a nice little restaurant nearby. They serve. Thanks, partner. But I really gotta run. My sister is probably waiting for me. See you tomorrow, okay? She answered before he had a chance to finish. Okay, tomorrow then. He answered as the question started popping again in his head. She had this effect on him. Always left him wondering. Is she ever gonna let me in that shell? It's outrageous how she keeps treating me like a stranger, even after we've been partners for 2 solid years. Is that what I get for being the only one to volunteer working with her? Yeah, that should teach me. I don't work with her. I doubt anyone ever will. I work for her. Catherine stopped by a Chinese restaurant in order to go. As she placed the boxes on the dining table, she called out, Crystal, I brought dinner. A woman entered the room carrying a notepad and a pen that she used to communicate when she was born mute. There was no need for notes between them, for they could understand each other even without anything being said. But the woman carried it around anyway. Catherine, through that, some Catherine thought that sometimes she could even hear Crystal's voice in her head. She felt it happened a couple of times when they were kids, but then again, children have the most vivid imagination. Crystal used to say that they had a sort of free pass into each other's head, a special reward for having to live with someone else wearing the same face as yours. Catherine stuck with the most plausible theory that it's not that hard to guess what's going on inside a mind that you know as well as your own. They were identical twins, and it was remarkable how identical they remained, even spending most of their lives apart. It was not only the features, but their weight, the hairstyle, and even favorite colors. Every now and then they would show up wearing a similar outfit, sometimes even the same color. The only thing that could help one tell them apart was their eyes. Catherine's were green, while Crystal's were as dark as night. The second one's complexion was also a little paler, and she had this look in her eyes, a bitter sadness that was always dancing in the blackness, like oil on water. They dined in silence, finished eating, and washed the dishes. The investigator used to have a cleaning lady to help with the apartment maintenance once a week, but she dismissed her as soon as her twins started living there 5 weeks ago. She knew the girl couldn't deal with strangers. She suspected her sister was slightly autistic, for she wouldn't relate to anyone but her. It had always been like that since she could remember. Crystal was wayward and somewhat aggressive. She hardly communicated, and the only solid links she had with the world were books and movies. Knowledge was her only true passion and interest. She usually took no interest in small talks. Although she had been living with Catherine only a few weeks, the shelf in her bedroom was already packed with books and DVDs. She ordered them via the internet, using her sister's credit card. Crystal learned how to use a computer in no time, even though she claimed she never seen one before. It goes to show how smart she was. The books ranged from black magic to the Holy Bible, passing through psychological treatises on behavior patterns and disturbances. So Catherine suspected the twin was very much aware of her own condition. After they were done with the dishes, the investigator threw herself on the couch as her sister sat on the cushioned chair beside it. Catherine was exhausted. This constant tiredness has been following her around for a while now. Although she had never felt like that before, she was trying her best not to overrate it and just blamed it on stress. Laid her head on a cushion and was almost instantly asleep when she thought she heard someone calling her name, Catherine. She rose her head in a quick move and immediately fixed her wide open eyes on Crystal. Her twin kept staring at her with the shadow of a smile curling in the corner of her mouth, as if her twin's discomfort was somewhat amusing to her. What? It's wrote in the pad. What? Nothing, said Catherine, a little puzzled. I thought I heard something in the hall. How was your day at work? It's also written. Crystal lifted the pad once again, after turning her head towards the half and towards the hall and shrugging her shoulders as if saying she didn't hear a thing. The usual, Catherine shortened it, closed her eyes again, but she could still feel eyes, her sister eyes on her, waiting patiently for a more specific answer. Well, to be perfectly honest, I'm working in a very disturbing new case. Really? What is it about? As she described the details of the case, the twins stared at her with a look she couldn't quite define. Catherine focused on trying to guess Crystal's thoughts, as she once could as a child, but it was as if she had built a wall around them, blocking her out. She could no longer get inside her sister's mind, as she once did, as she had just entered hers. Bothered by the situation, she interrupted her narrative, got up, kissed Crystal goodnight. That's time. So bothered by the situation, she interrupted her narrative, got up, kissed Crystal goodnight, and apologized for being so tired and in need of a shower. Maybe I've lost practice, Catherine thought as she stripped in the bathroom. It would only be normal after all these years. That's half an hour, guys. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you keep coming back for more of this story that's gonna surprise you. It has many, many turns, and it's a very concise plot. So please stay with me. Keep coming back. Thank you very much.